Windows update. There we go. Alright, the joys of constant Windows updates. But we should be live and on for another episode of the Perceptive podcast. We're on game, where some of the art and science of game. I am Josh Bice, and we have another developer interview lined up this week. We're going to be talking with the owner and founder of Rose Games. Discuss their game Genfanad, which hopefully I didn't butcher that too badly, which is going to be a single player or both single and multiplayer MMO from an indie team. So, please welcome to the cast, Andrei. How are you doing? All right. Andre, after our little brief editing or sound, if you wouldn't mind, feel free to introduce yourself and your role in game dev.
All right, so hello everyone. I think we have to do an introduction again since everything was muted. All right, so my name's Andre. I've been tangentially related to game dev ever since I was a kid. Our family always had a computer to tinker with, which was a bit ahead of the curve. And I have definitely broken one or two of them beyond repair while growing up and learning. I've been doing some sort of programming since I was 12. And after going to high school and college, I joined the software development industry outside of the game dev practice, just because, frankly, game dev doesn't really pay all that much. And joining one of the bigger software engineering firms. I was at Amazon for a decade. I was at Google for a couple of years. Definitely helped me learn and understand what all of the software engineering practices that professionals use while designing actual things. Game dev has always been my passion as a hobby, and I've been working and tinkering on different small things basically all throughout. Genfanad started as a passion project where I was just tinkering with the new technologies and seeing what existed and what I could do and what was working. And then I realized, hey, making a small multiplayer game was very simple and easy these days compared to my past experience. How hard can an MMO be? And here I am 2.5 years later and rediscovering all the lessons of exactly how hard an MMO can be.
Yep. And it's one of the things that I've talked with a lot of developers about, like the challenges of doing like such a grand scale game. Is Genfanad your studio's like first official game, or did you work on other projects?
It's the first game that we're officially releasing as the studio. As I mentioned, I've personally tinkered on a lot of different projects, and all of the members of Rose Tinted Games have other experience on different projects before. But we came together to build Genfanad specifically.
All right, and with I guess building this as an MMOG, what was kind of like what inspired you to make this like your first like full feature like official game?
So one thing that I'm very careful of is I'm always skeptical of the massively multiplayer label that has been attached to games of this type. We've always been positioning ourselves as more of a reasonably sized multiplayer game, closer to the original MUDs and the original scope of the inspiration game RuneScape Classic. We will have servers with a few hundred people online at the same time. We're not looking to be the new world with 700,000 people online at the same time in the same server. And making a reasonably sized game that holds a couple hundred people, well, technology has actually progressed a lot over the last couple of decades, and it's actually not too far out of the question for someone to build a game of a smaller scope, even if it has dozens of moving parts, dozens of systems interacting. All of those systems can fit onto a small server machine, for example.
Yep, and with kind of the independent space, I've spoken to a few developers in the past who have worked on their own takes when it comes to like kind of small scale MMORPGs. And it is as you said a few minutes ago, it is a genre where, if we were talking 15, 20 years ago, it would probably be borderline impossible for an independent team try and make an MMO. So I guess here's a question I'm curious about. From I guess, a technical standpoint, for developers or students watching us right now or watching the recorded version, how has, I think, game engines or has hardware and technology has advanced to make it, I guess, easier for someone like you to make an MMORPG as an indie developer?
Uh, MMOs are very much a breadth type system where you have not just one system that you have to build for your gameplay. You have to build dozens of systems all interacting with the same way. And the best way to answer your question is actually to give a specific example. When I was learning 3D game programming back in high school, don't ask me how long ago that was. That was multiple decades ago. But when I was learning, and I was trying to play around with network programming and trying to build a small little chatbot where you have a client and you have a server and all they do is pass text to each other. I was building it in C++. I was trying to use the Windows networking library. I ended up with thousands of lines of code just to get the window to pop up and to print text that other people have sent. A couple of years ago, I was trying to research new technologies that were on the market and trying to keep my skills fresh. And I wanted to recreate that same chatbot, which was the first network program that I had created all of those years ago. So I looked up browser-based technologies. I looked up Node.js, and I had something up and running from a quick tutorial in a chat app in less than 20 lines of code. And then I hosted it on the internet, and anyone could use it without having to download anything, without having to do anything. And I realized, well, if this one component is that much easier than I remember it, and those three guys in a garage 20 years ago could create an MMO by themselves, how hard can it be? The answer is, it is still very hard just because of the amount of work that is involved, the number of systems involved that most players don't even necessarily realize exist. So if you have an inventory, you have a bank, you have a login system, you have a messaging system, you have an account system, you have a session tracking system, and then the list just goes on and on and on. And every single one of those systems is not difficult to make anymore. And there's plenty of out-of-the-box solutions that you can use to make it easier on yourself, but you still have to solve all of those problems, and you still have to wire them together into a single cohesive unit. And if anything breaks, the adage of if you built it, you know exactly how to fix it. If you haven't built it, it's a black box to you, and it's going to take dozens of hours just to fix any trivial issue.
And again, like, there's a lot that goes into, well, just making an RPG, let alone an MMORPG.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess with that, what I guess what are you hoping, or like what's like the main marketing for Genfanad?
We've been trying to this is actually something that we've been working on for a long time and haven't actually come up with a clear and cohesive answer yet. We've basically been trying three different approaches to it. The first one is the nostalgia approach, which probably comes through the cleanest from our Kickstarter messaging, our past marketing efforts, and things like that. This is a game that doesn't have any of the new style of monetization of player exploitation that happens in recently released projects. And it's built using game design as filtered through a rose-tinted lens. So the games that you remember playing 20 years ago, if you looked at them as is and actually what they looked at and how they played like, you would be turned off. That's not necessarily something that you're looking for. But if you remember the feelings that you used to get while playing those games, how when an update happened, you were excited because you wouldn't know what was going on, we're trying to bring back that nostalgic feeling to a new generation of players. The second way that we've been trying to market is through our writing, our meta-based humor of this is an evil corporation exploiting adventurers in a virtual world humorously. And we have this meta humor of there is no fourth wall. The players are basically reacting to what is happening in game. Some of our earliest key art is basically one of the ones that I really liked was a player is mining a rock, just blindly mining a rock, and their inventory is over their head, and the rocks are just falling straight out. We are trying to get a very tongue-in-cheek type of humor, and the writing is definitely something that anyone who plays has called out as being one of our strengths, and trying to emphasize and show it off more and more is definitely something that we're trying to do. And the third aspect is the one that we feel is going to be the strongest if we can pull it off, if we can get it right. There is a very large amount of players. There's a very large community of people who like relaxing, repetitive, some would call it boring, but basically turn off your mind and just click type experiences. Start with Farmville, Animal Crossing, the type of cute and cozy atmosphere of just playing the game and being able to disconnect from the real world. That's something that we really want to do, and I know from the beginning that our game can do it. Back when I started, when we didn't have a team, when I was just working on the project solo, I was building some systems, and I just finished the tree system, and I found myself just clicking on trees mindlessly because they made a nice noise when they collapsed and they turned into stumps, and you got some XP and some messages popped up, but it didn't matter. It was on my own personal computer. There was no high scores. There was no actual items. I can give myself whatever I want, but I still found myself just relaxing when clicking and clicking on those trees. So that's when I knew that the game loop could actually stand up to time and people would still enjoy it if we built something like it.
Yep, I mean, that right there is like one of the major attractors of the idle genre. And that just hook of watching numbers go up to make other numbers go down to make more numbers go up. For people who watch me, they know that I play quite a bit of idle games in my time.
We don't want so the idle game genre is basically what we're looking for, but we're looking for basically like one notch above that. You still have to click the things to watch the numbers go up. You can't just sit back and watch. I don't know if you're familiar with Progress Quest from also decades back. That was always entertaining for me to watch, but from a game design perspective, that's not necessarily gameplay, is it?
Let's see, a Pony in chat one asks, is there going to be a guy who farms satyr horn? And he only gets 3, despite all satyrs visibly having a pair each.
Yep, that is a definite cliche of all RPG drop system mechanics, basically. You can't, I guess you can make resources that are realistic, but if you want to add game design frequently, better game design takes priority over realism. One of the things that we actually did in that genre specifically is we asked ourselves, well, a lot of MMOs have economy issues where too many items are produced, which devalues their purpose. So, for example, in RuneScape, someone who is training the smithing skill makes thousands of different armor pieces just to get one single level, which means that anyone who wants those armor pieces can get them basically for free because they're useless to the person making them. We were trying to solve that issue and trying to figure out how can we make it so that players still have to train their skills, but the things that they're producing are still interesting and valuable. And one of our game designers actually came up with a quality system where any given step in the process is very simple. We just have 3 qualities. Sometimes you get low quality, sometimes you get medium quality, and sometimes you get high quality. But we set up our crafting systems in a complex way with many different moving parts and interdependencies. So instead of just taking some ore, turning it into a bar, and turning it into a sword, we actually have you craft the bars into a pommel, and then have them crafted into a sheet, and then fold the sheet into a blade, and then combine So every single step in that process is, from a game design perspective, is very trivial. It's just take item A with recipe B and produce item C. But from a player experience perspective, it feels like they're actually crafting an item. And at every given step of the process, there's a small % chance of creating a high quality version of your output component. So if you have 2 high quality inputs, you still only get like a 10% chance of making a high quality output. And 10% sounds like a very good number for players to do. Oh, 1 in 10 chances? Of course I can make 10 of these things and get the high quality thing that I'm looking for. But if you think about what a sword is actually consists of and how many transformation steps there are, if you have 6 different steps to create a sword and each one is 1 in 10, well, that final sword, if you're looking to get a high quality sword, is a significant accomplishment.
And actually, that takes me to a question I was hoping you could clarify. In terms of the actual player interaction when they're crafting, is it like something as simple as just, click mine ore, and then, click smelt ore? Or are you actually like doing something each part of the production?
So we've been focusing on a simple interface for players. So all interaction in the game is built by your player avatar going and performing an action. In fact, since we're going for this retro style, we don't even have animated characters. The characters walk up to a tree and a little icon over their head pops up with a wood cutting hatchet that says, "You are cutting this tree." And then the tree poops and turns into a stump that says, "You have cut this tree down." That's actually one of the pretty more controversial art decisions, is that both saves us budget, but also is a stylistic choice that we want to follow. Josh. And so you have to take your player avatar and you have to go to a rock, and then you have to click mine the rock. And then once you get the ores in your inventory, you have to take them to a forge and smelt them into ores and click the forge. But the individual crafting actions that you take are very simple. You interact with a thing in the world, you take your items, you do have to unlock the recipes that you're working with, but once you've unlocked the recipes, you just click make, and your character goes through the motions of actually making the items for you.
Okay. And as a quick message for people watching, I think we may have some sound issues just with how Google Hangout is messing with the phone. So if my voice is cutting in and out, I do apologize for that. I just raised the gain up on OBS on my side, hoping that will at least counter to some extent, but we'll see.
Mhm.
Right. Let's see. Yeah, and I think there's always that push and pull between the how much interaction when you are doing any kind of crafting. That some games will have it be super elaborate to the point that it just becomes a huge waste of time or becomes very cumbersome to do. And then there are games where it's just, again, you click 3 buttons and you create a fully furnished house and it's completely ready to go. And I don't know. I don't know where I would fall on that because I've played a few of these kinds of, I guess, like the blacksmith simulator or shop simulator. There's tons and tons of simulators, and it always feels like it's just busy work in a lot of those games because it is just you doing the same thing for every single production. It's just, ballooning that out to 20, 30 different tasks to make one thing.
Well, one person's busy work is another person's relaxation time.
Yep.
Some people, I actually know a lot of engineers who have retired and went into woodworking and blacksmithing and pottery and into very, very material, in the moment type disciplines where when you're dealing with knowledge work, you have to think a lot and but all of your actual work is sitting and physically typing things into a keyboard or sitting in a meeting and speaking up occasionally. But when it comes to a game, it really depends on what you're looking for in a game. Some games and there is no right or wrong answer to game design. Game design is more of an art than a science. And depending on what you want your players to feel and what you want your players to take away from the experience that they're getting, different systems make more or less sense. A game with a crafting system where you just go and you select your option from a list and then you make that is a game that doesn't put as much focus onto the crafting system. Crafting is a means to an end. It is not the end in itself. A blacksmithing simulator, and I'm not sure if that's a real game or not, where you actually are in a fully 3D blacksmith and then you take your ore and then you throw it into a smelt and then you actually interact with it to actually pull all the impurities out, and then you pour it into a bar mold and then you put it somewhere to cool, and then that's a completely different experience. And that's the experience where you actually get to pretend you're a blacksmith. You get the physicality out of it. And between those two extremes lies a lot of different game design space that can be measured and mined.
Yeah.
For what we're doing, we want crafting to feel more involved than just picking an item from a list. So we added all of these intermediate steps. And one of the things that many MMOs get wrong, or many games get wrong, is they focus on one specific game experience, one specific game loop, and put all of the effort into making that loop good. And then everything else in the game that they put in is more of an afterthought to that game loop. So in a lot of MMOs, that core game loop is combat, and everything else that is not combat is an afterthought. So why do you craft items? Well, because you want a better sword to do the interesting combat loop with. Why do you farm this food? Well, because you want to recover more health from the potions that you're making for your combat game loop. And
So,
what we want is to make it so that the blacksmithing crafting system is a game loop in itself. It's if a player wants to go in and become a blacksmith and be a blacksmith, they don't have to actually learn how to blacksmith in real life and what the different actions that they have to take. It's still an abstraction. It's still a gameplay design over clicking things and moving things around. But they get the interesting experiences, the highs and lows of the combat loop. The highs being when you finally craft the masterwork sword that you're after thousands of failed attempts, and the lows being when you go to a furnace and out of your 10 high quality ores, you only manage to make one bar. Randomness is actually a pretty core component of game design that players hate and love at the same time.
As somebody who's doing a roundtable on roguelike design, I'm certainly going to be talking about RNG and how it factors into all.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess as another question for you to clarify, with the actual gameplay, so obviously crafting is a major point of this. Do you have combat and other things that you're doing in the world as well?
Yes, our basic game design is patterned amongst the MUDs and the early RPGs of the 2000 era. We've looked at RuneScape Classic. If you're familiar with RuneScape as the game, they are now on their third iteration, which is basically the full client, the full graphical thing. It's still a point-to-click and move thing, but it's very divorced from the original starting points. They recently released a product called Oldscape RuneScape, which and I say recently, it's also like a decade old at this point. But they recently released a product called Oldscape RuneScape, which was the version of RuneScape from 2006 that was a lot simpler, a lot more self-contained. And I'm a fan of Oldscape RuneScape. I love what they're doing. I love that they created the world back when it was like, and they're polling players to expand it. But that's not the version of the game that I fell in love with. That's not the version of the game that I have fond nostalgic memories of. There's a version even before that, which is now called RuneScape Classic, which was a very, very low scale game. It was written in Java. Had a tiny resolution. All the NPCs were like little low res sprites in a 3D world back in 2001, and that's the game I fondly remember, and that's the game that we're patterning off of. That's why we have a cartoony style of appearance. That's why we have the hand-drawn monsters and characters walking around with sprite sheets rather than low poly models. That's why we have this wonky combat mechanic where when you attack another monster on a different tile, you walk over to them, then you both go into the same tile, and it turns into a side view Final Fantasy like animation of just the player and the monster whacking each other back and forth and little damage icons appearing. It's very not modern. It's very retro inspired. That's what we're going for in terms of a combat mechanic.
All right. So with the actual economy itself, then, as you've been saying that a lot of it is going to be about, going for high quality, buying and selling along those lines. How do you, or what are your plans for, like, how, I guess, the player-based economy going to function for the game?
So what we're trying to cultivate a friendly and welcoming community. In fact, a lot of our marketing is very much what we're not. We're not a traditional MMO. We're anyone who likes MMOs, anyone who is playing MMOs today, anyone who's playing old school RuneScape or World of Warcraft Classic or New World, they have those games. They are going to play those games. They're not going to go to some indie project that has a tiny team trying to replicate something from 20 years ago. What we're trying to look for is people who are interested in a new experience, people who might have been scared off from the requirements that MMOs have on them. Someone who likes to play Animal Crossing casually for a couple hours a week is not going to be someone who goes and spends 80 hours grinding their characters to do the late game raids in World of Warcraft. That's just not the same audience. That's not the same types of people. And we want to build a community that's welcoming. And so far, we've managed to achieve that with the players who are playing the alpha and the beta. We'll see if we can carry that forward going into the game itself. But whenever someone new comes to play, they frequently get welcomed by other people. People give them some newbie items to help them start out with. They always answer questions quickly and things like that. From an economy perspective, it's a question of looking at the vast volumes of data from the past and seeing if we can identify some of the issues that have caused problems in the past, and going into our designs with eyes open and being able and ready and willing to change things in response. If you ask me for specific lessons about economy, I can probably tell you 3. The first specific lesson is monitor your sources and sinks very carefully. Both inflation and deflation are very bad for longevity of the game. I always use RuneScape examples because that's the game I grew up with and that's the game I'm most familiar with, but every single MMO has gone through similar patterns and similar discoveries, and there's always something to learn. But one of the specific examples is don't create a spell to transform items into gold. That's basically the source of a large chunk of RuneScape's problems. The second lesson I would give is monitor your sources, don't transmute gold, and make players want to interact with each other. Technically, if 2 players are trading and one player has a sword and another player has 50 gold, and then they make the trade, and then the sword is traded for the 50 gold, technically that's not a source or sink to the economy. From the economy's perspective, the game still has 50 gold in it. The game economy still has a sword in it. It just changed owners. But that interaction of both players having something that they want more is what enables trading in the first place. And specialization and basically you want to make it so that not all players want to do all things. If one player wants to do combat and another player wants to do blacksmithing, a trade environment will naturally evolve. But if everyone wants to do combat and players are forced to do blacksmithing just to make it so that the items that they need for combat work, that makes it more difficult for an economy to actually evolve naturally.
Right. And that actually takes me to this next question then. So, with how the game is being set up,
mm-hmm.
can somebody theoretically do everything? Can they be the master blacksmith, farmer, apothecary, warrior, any other professions? Or are there, like, hard limits? Like, let's say you can only specialize in 2 tracks, 3 tracks.
We're trying to make it a soft limit, so there's no hard limit. Anyone can gain XP in any skill that they choose to follow. But there's the first soft limit is time, of course. This is a statement that has bit many a game developer in the past, but we don't expect players to max out their characters. In fact, if we make a design, the game is kind of designed around the fact that there's an exponential curve, and unlike RuneScape, we are setting our numbers much more conservatively such that we don't expect players to reach a max skill level in any skill in the first year that the game is out. Will there be players crazy enough and devoted enough to do that anyway? Probably, but when we're talking about game design, we're talking about the majority of player base, not individual outliers. The second soft requirement is a knowledge requirement. If you have a traditional crafting system which just has 10 recipes per level, and there's 20 levels, then someone can become a master and understand everything to do with crafting pretty quickly. If we have a system as complex and involved as our current blacksmithing forging system, with, for example, when I described the method of making a sword, imagine that method being applied to all of the 20 output items that blacksmithing has. So there's 40 intermediate components that you have to learn with, and you have to figure out the recipes and the combinations to create each output product that you actually want. That's a lot of knowledge overhead that you want. So someone, frankly, is either going to just go to a wiki and look up what the answer is whenever they need to do it, or they'll specialize and they'll work on one specific thing at a given time.
All right. And with
and one of your fans says, Jared mentions that players in the genre are very dedicated to min-maxing. That you are absolutely right, and that's what goes back to the original audience question that I was mentioning, where players who are in the MMO genre who are looking for an MMO to play probably would not be the target audience that we're most looking to attract. We're looking for the players who are looking for a more casual game to play for like 1 to 5 hours a week. Between tasks, they log in and they click some trees. They log in and they go and they customize their character a bit. Things like that.
So, with the actual, like, any kind of crafting or manufacturing, does it happen in real time? As in, to smith this sword, this next set will literally take 45 minutes and 32 seconds. That kind of.
We have not been pursuing those types of items. We want players to be playing the game rather than waiting around for things to happen. There's nothing necessarily wrong with time-based mechanics, and someone in the chat mentioned daily quests and things like that. I'm personally not a big fan of it, of those types of mechanics, since when I'm playing the game, I want to be playing the game rather than clicking it and then coming back a day or two later.
All
That's
right.
not to say we won't have those mechanics in the future, but we're currently not building any mechanics like that.
All right. So another thing I want to ask you about in terms of the economy and kind of the design of your items, products. So you
Mhm.
said earlier that again, like every item that you can manufacture can go through the different degrees of like poor, good, fantastic.
Mhm.
In terms of like from a gameplay perspective, what is kind of like the difference between a poor sword, or I should like this, a poor sword, and you got every perfect roll right. This is like the best possible version of this sword that you could make.
Uh, Obviously, this is a question that has a lot of different game design considerations. We've been basically earmarking them as, because there's those three tiers, we were earmarking the low quality items as basically being one step up from a failure. Low quality items are frequently, you can find them relatively easily. Monsters drop low quality equipment. You can find low quality equipment in stores, in spawns, randomly spawning across the map, things like that. They're basically the junk version of the tier. So if you have unlocked the bronze equipment tier and you find a bronze dagger and it's low quality, well, it's going to be worse than whatever you had before. Uh, and the low quality is basically you'll use it if you have to, but it's not very useful. Medium quality is basically the bread and butter version of the items. Those are the items that you can. Uh, they're only available through player smithing, and those are the ones that you have to find and make and acquire. And those are the versions of the tier that we expect most players to have. So someone who unlocks mithril would have a set of regular quality mithril as what they acquire. And then high quality is basically the tier above that, and the purpose of high quality is to make it so that players have a goal that is optional but significantly better. So it's basically a tier and a half above what the baseline is. So if a normal quality, we use the historical bronze, iron, steel progression. So if you have a giant bronze sword that is high quality, it's better than most medium quality iron swords. But it's approximately the same as a medium quality giant sword. So you basically get a tier of bonus above it. And all of these are things that we are going to be monitoring and tweaking on a regular basis. When I originally mentioned the three mistakes of game design that we've been trying hard to avoid in the past the second mistake that we're trying hard to avoid is not to lock ourselves into the decisions that were taken in the past. I don't know how many MMOs have a ongoing buff and nerf cycle that is measured, but when I used to play a lot of Dota, and both Dota and League of Legends have very large and very comprehensive patch notes for every single update, where they just go in and they change every single variable in the world to try to bring it closer to the desired experience. Mobile players generally accept and actually like the fact that what they've learned and what they have internalized is actually changing over time. Obviously, no one's going to be happy when their favorite character gets nerfed or when someone who they hate playing against gets buffed. But overall, from a gameplay experience, everyone expects those types of changes to happen on a regular basis. RuneScape never did that. Once RuneScape said, you have this sword, it's worth 50 gold, and it has 23 power and 16 aim, those numbers never changed. Even if people discovered, oh, this sword is actually significantly easier to obtain than we thought, or, oh, this power number actually doesn't scale with the version that we want, they never changed those. And we're actually trying to, since we're starting from scratch, since there's no 20 years of expectations from the players who are coming to our game, we can actually change. We can kill the golden goose. We can figure out how are we going to do things differently. And one of the things that we've already been doing during the beta process is just spewing out balance patches on a regular basis so that players don't get too attached to the numbers and the variables that they're seeing. That ongoing nerfs and buffs to the quality of everything in the game is something that players come to us and expect when they're playing. So since our goal is weekly content updates, unlike most games who have moved to quarterly or yearly release cycles, because we want to have weekly content updates, and we've been building our tools and our development processes in order to reach that once a week delivery point. At worst, if we make a mistake, we can fix it relatively quickly, even without hot patching. And if players realize, okay, so iron arrows are 10 power. Oh, next week they're going to be 8 power. Oh no, that's too much. We're going to go to 9 power. Our hope is that building an MMO with that type of reactive nature lets us get closer to an ideal player experience. There is no such thing as the perfect player experience, but it gets us closer to that ideal.
All right. So 2 questions I want to ask you then, regarding the items. So the first one, do you have like durability? Like, can weapons and gear break over time, stuff like that?
That's something that. So first off, I will answer the question. Durability is not a bad system. It's a system that players dislike, but has a very important game design role. Someone in your chat actually mentioned Breath of the Wild as an example. As a game designer, I love Breath of the Wild's durability system. It gives players the reason to search out new things and to constantly change up their approach. If Breath of the Wild had no durability, someone would find early royal sword and then never have a reason to look for weapons ever again, which basically invalidates 90% of the game design that people went in and wanted to go through that. Yes, one of them. And so durability is the answer to a game design problem. The game design problem being, you have all of these items. How do you make sure that the items go away over time? Because if they build up, then they basically become useless. They no longer have any value. Or if they have a flat value that you can always sell them to the store, you've basically built up inflation in your game. You now have a gold source that is running unchecked. So that's my aside as to why durability is good. That said, we don't currently have any durability. From a technical design perspective, all of our items are just labels around our items don't have any customization on them. We don't track per item properties, so we can't actually implement durability yet. And we've had multiple game design discussions of whether durability is a good concept to address in our game, whether that's something that we want to build. Again, RuneScape had the problem where they introduced durability too late into the process and the player base revolted. RuneScape for 6 or 7 years, or no, not 6 or 7, 4 to 5 years, had items that were permanent, that you never lost, that you never had to do anything with. And then they introduced the Barrows equipment, and all of a sudden your items degraded, and players hated that. So basically everyone was stuck on the level right before that, which was the dragon equipment. I don't know how to... solving the problem of player-based revolt is a long topic that is hard to figure out. And basically players take what they have always seen as the true state of the world, and any change can cause a backlash. The bigger the quality of the change, the more things are breaking, the more difficult that becomes. Adding durability to all items is a change that would potentially cause a lot of people pain. So we're well aware that that's something that we want to go into eyes open. Will we ever implement a durability system? Maybe. But what we know, we will have to be very careful about how to do it. And the worst thing that can happen is a player is spent 2 hours gearing up to a combat, spent getting to this rare boss encounter that drains all of their resources, and halfway through their sword breaks on them. That is a experience that can cause someone to quit a game, and that's something that we want to avoid very hard.
Oh yes. Part of the challenge. My sound is still acting up. Hang on. Hopefully everyone can still hear me stream wide. But part of the challenge, I'm going to probably get a little bit closer to my microphone. You guys can hear me even more booming. But part of the challenge of these games is the very fact that, especially for an MMO, it is a live service game. It is something that you intend to grow, you intend to change week, month by month, year by year. But you have to, again, as you just said, be very careful about brand new systems. There's a difference, or a very big difference, between saying, we're introducing a new class of weapon, versus saying, we're now introducing, your character can stub their toe and get diseases, and now your character can die.
Sakurai!
Yeah.
Are you referring to the tripping mechanic from Smash Brothers?
A little bit.
Yeah.
And it is a very tough line to walk, because as you said, aren't going to be setting things in stone. It's not going to be a case of the sword is a sword and will always be this way from now until, the sun decides to die. But it's always that very big risk and reward. And that actually takes me to another question. Regarding the itemization, designing the various things, if is content or is stuff generated with fixed values or random values? What I mean by that is, if I roll a good sword, and if I roll 10 goods, do they all have the same good value, or is there a spectrum of what good is?
Today, I alluded to it earlier with the durability question, but today, the good sword is always the same exact item. So items are commoditized. If you have a bronze, high quality, brutal sword, it'll always have the exact same stats as every other bronze, high quality, brutal sword. If you have 10 of them, they'll all have identical stats. And we don't currently track customization or attributes on individual items. Now, from a game design space, one of the things that you want to be one of the things that you always have to account for when running a live service is, what is the design space? What are you going to build a year from now, 5 years from now, 20 years from now, 100 years from now? Probably not the latter. And will we have weapon enchantments that'll let you customize individual weapons even further? Almost certainly at some point in the future, we will build some system and some mechanics to let you do that. How that's going to interrelate with everything else, and whether we're going to have per item ranges and randomization. From our current game design, that would actually be more difficult to deal with. We have the concept of a bank where you can store all your things, but banks have a limited number of slots. So if you have a bronze brutal sword and you have 10 of them, and they all have a slightly different range value, do they take up 10 slots or do they take up 1 slot? Do we build a user experience that lets you choose exactly which of the 10 you want? Those are all difficult questions to answer, and we've just punted on answering them right now.
All right. So I think another question I want to ask you then, with regards to the actual economic model or payment model, something that Pony asked earlier, but I think this is a good time to bring it up. Mm-hmm. In terms of somebody playing Genfanad, is there going to be a retail cost, a monthly cost, anything along those?
So we're trying very hard to avoid the exploitative monetization methods that exist in the past. that exist in many games, especially mobile games in the genre today. We are going to try really hard to support the game on a optional subscription basis. So there's a free game that anyone is able to play that has all of the content updates that players get, and then if you pay for a subscription, you get additional benefits. Right now, they're mostly out-of-game benefits. You get a little subscriber icon, you get a title, you get Discord badge, you get extra bank space, things like that. At some point in the future, when we feel like the free game is self-contained enough, we're going to make future updates locked behind a subscription. So, for example, only subscribers can get to this new world, this new continent, or only subscribers can build a sailboat to sail on the ocean, or things like that. I do understand that there are necessities to actually funding a game studio. So we are going to have something similar. We are considering other ways of monetizing. And one thing that I have made very clear is no NFTs, no crypto bullshit. And we do not want to give players game advantages aside from the subscribers versus non-subscribers.
All right. And with this kind of focus on an economy, you of course just said no NFTs and things like that. Will there be the actual ability to buy and sell items with real money in the game, or will everything only be handled with in-game?
That is the question about in-game advantages, and I consider buying an item or even rolling a chest to get a potential item to be considered unacceptable.
Right.
We are considering a bond type system where you can buy a month of subscription and then trade it with someone else, but that's not considered a game advantage because bond systems are well known to try to avoid gold trading and to try to make it so that things are at least safer, if not necessarily cleaner. That's the one exception that we're basically considering to that rule. It doesn't buy you a gold advantage over other players because ultimately the reward that you're asking for does come from another player. And strictly speaking, we don't want to limit trading. So a player can always help out their friends. They can always give them if you invite your friend to join an MMO, you can always just trade them and give them 100,000 gold or something like that, which is a game advantage that isn't earned. Bonds are very similar in that regard. And yeah, we haven't finalized any of the pricing, but we're looking for definitely a less than $10 a month subscription fee.
All right. And I think this is a pretty obvious question, but yes. In terms of the social aspect of the game, do you have like sets for alliances, guilds, kind of thing? And also on top of that, will there be any kind of like player created settlements? There's been a very popular for a lot of MMOs to buy your own set of land, have your own tavern or blacksmith or
those are very good questions. One of the lessons that I learned really early on in my career is solve the problems that are in front of you. If you get too tied up with what is going to happen 5 years from now, you're going to miss and you're never going to actually reach those 5 years from now, the problems that you want to solve. Just like a lot of game developers start and say, oh, I want to build my engine to make the perfect game ever, and they never actually end up starting their game, much less finishing it. A lot of those questions come to that. Will we have player-owned houses? How will they work? Will we have player-owned settlements and communities and clan housing and things like that? The answer is yes, at some point. We don't know exactly what the design for those is going to look like, and we'll solve that problem when it comes time to release it. However, regards to the social aspects of the game, humans are very, very social animals. People love establishing communities. People love being part of the in-group or the out-group or creating their own conflicts. And as a game developer, it's our job to build something that lets players do those certain things. When we had an alpha test a year back where we introduced the Halloween area for players to explore, a subset of players got really, really attached to the Ant NPCs because they had the best drops during that test, and they created a clan called the Ant Squad, and basically started doing a bunch of content and screenshots and inviting people and harassing other people to join them and things like that. That type of gameplay experience is amazing. As a game designer, that's the type of involvement, that's the type of engagement you want to see your community doing. And you don't have to do anything as a game developer to do that to start. People will do that. People will form what's the word? People will form cliques, and people will have friends and enemies, and I'll do all sorts of things. And will our game actually have support for clans? Of course, at some point we will build that, but we want to make sure that there's enough demand for it first, so that we're not building a clan system to enable people to group up and to form these things. We're building a clan system to support the players who already have done those things, and that's the difference in thinking that I kind of that's the difference in thinking that I think is a bit different than what other game designers think in terms of those regards.
All right. And to board fans, and this is another really important question, do you have anything in mind in order to prevent scamming? Or even just having another very big thing of a lot of MMOs or any kind of economical-based game, of course, is the black market. We have seen this with World of Warcraft, Counter-Strike, EverQuest, you name it. And it's something that if a developer isn't properly thinking about, it can, I think, upset the balance of their.
It absolutely can. There's two types of there's many types of malicious behavior. There's the malicious behavior for a personal profit, and there's malicious behavior for personal achievement, I guess is the thing. Malicious behavior for personal profit, things like gold sellers, things like scammers, things like ultimately come down to a person getting out-of-game benefits for performing certain game actions. And those are really hard to keep track of. We obviously have a ban mute system, we have community moderators, we have things like that to try to catch some of that. But and of course, as we discover those types of behaviors, we would ban them. And if you catch them early enough in the process such that they don't get the out-of-game benefits that they're looking for, they will go away. Making it so that you can catch them sooner, and making it so that's a very difficult story, and probably the topic of multiple hours of conversation all by itself. But that's and the bond message that I mentioned is basically if there is a need from the audience to buy gold, that need they will go to the black market if they have to, but if they don't have to, they won't. So there is also a component of the game design to try to make it so that you preempt the behavior that would want them to do that. Ultimately, we are a grinding and relaxing game. If someone doesn't want to grind and relax, then they're not going to like Genfanad. The other half of the malicious behavior is the malicious behavior for personal achievements. So like they want to get a high score, so they bought their characters or things like that. Those have more technical solutions rather than social solutions, but there are social solutions that can help with that as well. So things like if you have a high score table, some people will want to be at the top of that high score table. But if you don't have a high score table, then you preempt the people who try to do that, or you make it so that it doesn't matter if someone is botting necessarily just to get their level up. Those are some of the game design solutions that we're definitely thinking of.
All right.
Do I have all the answers? No. If I had all the answers, I could package them and sell them as an answer to every game developer out there.
All right. As a quick time check, we are just about an hour. The
Mhm.
actual recording, probably a little bit less with some of the down related issues. So I would say maybe another 10 to 15 minutes,
Mhm.
and I'm gonna put this as last call for questions at. So one thing that I wanted to ask you about in terms of the state of it right now. I was looking at the store page and the so in terms of the actual aesthetic of Genfanad, is that finalized or is that still being done?
Uh, it depends on which of the screenshots you're referring to. If you're looking at the ones with a brown, soft earthen color aesthetic, those are more finalized UI wise. If you're looking at the Windows 95 transparent backgrounds with headings, that's the old version. Uh, so from an aesthetic perspective, I think we are where we want to be. The world design, the character art, the uh, thin walls, the 3D scenery with 2D sprites moving around on it. That's basically what we're going to be looking for. There are definitely many improvements that can be made in that aesthetic. For example, the water shader is very rudimentary right now and needs to be significantly improved. We probably want to have our character model upscaled and have like bigger eyes and more cartoony style. Uh, things like that are always going to be improved and always going to be iterated on. But are we going to move from our character art into low polygon models, or are we going to make the walls thicker, or are we going to redesign the entire map? Probably not. From a UI perspective, we're currently iterating on various UI components, and we did have professionals develop the UI that you see in front of it to be more attractive to more casual players. So the interaction with the game is and always will be simple. You click on a thing in the world, you click on an inventory in your icon, a menu pops up, you click on an item in the menu. And in fact, mobile support is something that you basically really have to have in a game like this. And we have been building our UIs and building all of this. We have been developing the game and programming the game with an understanding that this is going to be a mobile game as well. Uh, it's a Today it's a browser-based game. It's going to be supported on Steam as well. Uh, but the technologies that are used for browser-based games can be easily ported to mobile support as well.
All right. And to a board fan's comment, what's the max level of an idea?
That we're going with the RuneScape 99 in every individual skill. Um, the XP curve and the XP per item we have developed from scratch to try to avoid the problem of skipping all of the early levels and all of the content being concentrated into a small band that not all players have. Uh, and we're still going to continue iterating on that as we go along. But overall, 99 is the max level in any given skill, and how those translate to overall player level, we're not sure yet.
Right. And I guess as a follow up to what we're talking about earlier, with regards to future plans and having things, I guess you have a rough idea of how the game will grow. Like as you said, like introducing new worlds, new.
So we basically have a plan. The plan is the further into the future you look, the more uncertain and the vaguer the plan is. Like today, we are building the continent of New Blandia. It's based on the United States, and the areas have the colonies, the Midwest, uh, or the American Western type areas, the traditional fantasy area, which doesn't exist in the US, the Florida Man area, the Innsmouth Lovecraftian type area, the Canada area. Uh, and we've basically been building it, building everything that we have in a way that we can deliver weekly content updates that feel substantial. So most of the first content is actually fully mapped and ready for release. Different. We have a few hundred monster designs ready to release. We have hundreds of items, hundreds of character things, and we know for each skill and for the new skills that are coming out, we know vaguely what the next milestones are. For the next, and then planning wise, month over month, we know the vague monthly release themes through the middle of next year. And then for each month, we know what is going to be the contents of each update for the next 3 months or so. And then we're basically building two different steps. We're building a lot of content, and then we're assembling the content that we have built into individual updates that have a time period.
All right. So, for people watching us right now, either live or recorded, if they're interested in checking out Genfanad, is it available for, I guess, do you have like a public beta or alpha testing, or is it invite only?
Currently, we're running a invite only beta for people who have backed our Kickstarter back in June. We are planning to launch the game this year. Watch our website and watch our Discord for announcements of the launch date that is probably happening. The announcement for the launch date is probably happening in the next 2 weeks. We are planning to launch the game this year. We will launch with a limited amount of content, basically what is in the beta today. And the purpose of the closed beta is actually to establish our team to have the process to release and QA the updates for every weeks of development. Whereas for the past 2 years, we have been working on a very ad hoc way of we're just building whatever. Once the game releases, we are going to be releasing the weekly updates for players to for players to try out and play with. And once the game releases, that's the point after which we can stop. We can no longer really wipe character accounts. So it's very important for us to do all of the testing such that we get to a point where people cannot get a competitive advantage through things that are unbalanced, basically.
All right. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I want to discuss. I guess anything from a mechanical or design point of view that we haven't touched on yet that you like to bring up?
We built all of our systems in a way that we can actually deliver the weekly updates without a lot of we have tried to de-risk every part of the content production pipeline that we could. So a lot of the actual content that we want to build doesn't even require any code anymore. So things like we built things very generically in order to make it possible to do that. So instead of writing code for a fishing skill and for a mining skill and for a woodcutting skill, we actually wrote code to handle gathering skills for all different node types. And our game designers can actually create new gathering type skills without ever having to modify the engine to do so. We've taken that approach and applied it to the tools that we're building as well, so that we can actually one of the unfortunate facts is the bigger a game is, the more difficult it is to create content for it. So if you have a game that starts out very small and the developers can quickly iterate and quickly build out new things for that game. RuneScape started 1 week. They said, we have released 4 new quests for players to play. And now these days, it's like every 3 months, you might get half a quest. Our goal is to give players the feeling of constant updates, of constant reworking, so that whenever they come back to the game, they always feel like there's something new for them to do. And with that as a design goal, we've tried very hard to make things as independent as possible, to try to avoid the fact that if you're building something, it has to touch hundreds of different things, so that we can keep delivering and keep building new stuff for as long as the game lasts.
All right. I just thought of one more itemization question I have for you. In terms of, like, let's say, late game or super powerful items, is there going to be anything that requires like multiple professions? As in order to build this armor, I need a specific vegetable from a farmer, specific ore from a blacksmith, and then let's say specific ale from a tavern, or then all put together to create like super fancy ultra weapon or something.
Uh, what you ask is actually a better, from a game design perspective. What you ask is actually a very good way of tying professions together. That basically gives people a reason to do certain things that they wouldn't otherwise. Another game design flaw that I want to avoid is making crafting skills redundant through other crafting skills. So, for example, in RuneScape, the best sword that you can get, or my knowledge is a couple years out of date, but the best sword that you can get for a while was gotten through the dungeoneering skill, not through the forging skill. That's a mistake because it makes forging useless. And one of the things that I want to do is I want to make sure that when we introduce content, we scale it and we balance it in a way that makes it additive to the skills that they're supporting rather than replacing. So if we want to release a new sword and we have a boss and we want the new sword to be acquired through that boss, instead of making the boss just drop the sword and let players access it, we would make it so that the boss drops a necessary component that you still have to take to a smith to create that sword. And that smith should be a player, not a NPC, to make the profession actually valuable. And to your specific question of whether there should be cross-profession activities, absolutely. We haven't designed them yet. We haven't figured out all of them, but one of the ones that I know for sure are going to happen is we have a tailoring profession and we have a whittling profession, which is basically woodworking. And there are some things like sailboats that require both sails, which are cloth, and wood, which is the boat itself. So why does the sailing profession not require a whittler and a tailor to contribute to it? And those types of, we basically are thinking, for all of the professions, we're thinking of how do we break them up into chunks. So for example, for mining, you have hard metals that are used in smithing to make armors and weapons. You have soft metals that are used in jewelry crafting and enchantment and things like that. And then a future update might introduce other minerals like salt. And what do you use salt for? Well, you use it as a spice to make dishes more powerful or something like that. And we've been trying to make it so that all of the professions that we make are divided into at least a few different pieces so that they're not one-note things that are only used for a specific thing. Another example, whittling. Well, to start it's to make bows and arrows. But at some point in the future, you're going to use whittling to make wands and staves for magic. And at another point in the future, you might craft, I don't know, wooden TV frames or something like that when we have a lot of different things to consider.
All right. So I guess there's a bit of some of a tangent question. I have to ask: did you ever play the game? What was it? A Tale in the Desert at MMO from early 2000.
I think I've heard of it. I've not played it myself. I think I've read some about it.
I was just gonna say, like, from how you're describing Genfanad in terms of like the crafting and kind of the interdependency between players' professions, it reminds me a lot of that game. Simple, was just and that was just 100% economic MMO. Like there was I'm pretty sure there was no combat I played, and it was just all about the crafting and the economy.
Mm-hmm. We're not going quite in that direction. Someone who wants to just play by themselves and click trees every once in a while and build up their character is welcome to play Genfanad. There's the concept of Iron Man and the concept of building up your character without avoiding all of the economy and all of the other player interaction is definitely something that is appealing to some players. We don't want to impede that necessarily, but yes, we want to we don't want to force people to interact with other players, but we would definitely want to make it so that those interactions are happening on a regular basis.
All right. So I think with that, let's. I think this is a good time to wrap things up. So, as you said earlier, that you're planning on releasing the public version of Genfanad sometime this year. It will be available on Steam, browser, and mobile. In terms of, I guess, like, if there's anything else, like, from an economic standpoint, mention, of course, it will be a subscription. Are you planning on doing anything in terms of DLC based content, as in, buy access to, this island or this area with this amount of resources, kind of like the Guild Wars question?
So the core game design principles that we've been following from the beginning of the project, even before we had a team working on it, is nostalgia and exploration. Nostalgia is obvious, but the concept of exploration is what really led to the design of weekly updates being the core conceit of the project. We want weekly updates available to everyone who is playing. We want people to be excited about those updates. We want, if there's a quest released, we want the player experience to see all of these players converging on this one point. There's a very interesting historical photo of RuneScape where they released the Dragon Slayer quest, which was the last free-to-play quest, and they had 100 because players could only talk to an NPC. One player could talk to an NPC at a time. They had a queue of 100 people standing in a line with the developers of the game actually organizing the line so people wouldn't cut in line and things like that. I think player interactions like that are fascinating. I want to encourage them as much as possible. When someone is doing a quest, they should feel like they're playing a multiplayer game. They should see other people. They should encounter other people. They should talk to other people. And DLC for only a subset of players just doesn't give that same impression. We're working for the one update a week, and everyone gets that update. Eventually, that everyone is going to be paying subscribers, but the goal of it is so that the subscription to Genfanad is cheap enough that you can afford it. You can play the game, even if you're playing the game for a couple hours a week, even if you're playing the game for 30 minutes a day, it's still worth it in that regard.
All right. So I think with that, before we kind of do like wrap up with promotional and social media stuff, do you have any final thoughts? Anything you'd like to say to the fans? Any final points about MMOs? The floor is yours.
If you're thinking of making an MMO, don't. There is a large community of indie MMO creators. If you are making an MMO, feel free to ping me and get an invite. Most are never released. People significantly underestimate the MMOs. Many games are like icebergs. You don't see the bulk of the work. And even if you enjoy the parts that you see, there are frequently dozens of other things that you probably wouldn't. Making a solo game that is multiplayer, that has a fixed world, is a lot easier than it used to be. That does not mean that running and marketing a game like that is easier than it used to be.
All right, and Pony had one final question: will there be different server types in Genfanad, or is it all just one global?
We have a sharded from a technical perspective, we have a sharded model. Every game server is an independent application. So, but player state is preserved when they log in. So you can log into any one of the servers that we have. So we're probably going to start with, but the servers are identical to each other. So it doesn't matter whether you're logging into the Europe server or the North America server or the Australia server. They all have the same content, the same types of experience. If you're asking about role playing and player versus player experiences, role playing absolutely. That's something that players will do and discover themselves. And PvP is something that I'm personally not a big fan of, but I understand the reasons for PvP in game design. And we have 3 different forms of PvP that we're considering as categories. The first one is obviously one-on-one or clan-based, just a free-for-all area where you can kill other players. Then there's formal dueling, where you can ask a challenge someone else to fight with a certain set of rules. And then there's a more nebulous group versus group, player versus player experience, which isn't combat, but things like, let's say there's a little house. Let's say there's a little house somewhere on a map, and there are some rock resource nodes in that house, and there's also some fish resource nodes next to that house. And the house has a choice. Does the house have a furnace, or does it have a range? Do the fishers want to cook their fish quickly, or do the miners want to turn their ores into bars quickly? And then the choice of which one that is something that is decided upon by the player base in some way. Those 3 groups of PvP type content are things that we're very interested in figuring out how to get right.
Right, sounds good. And it definitely sounds like it's an interesting game. From how you've been describing it, it definitely seems like you've put in a lot of time in terms of figuring out how you want the balance, which is a very important. Again, to what you said earlier, it's not the easiest genre to make a game in. I guess just to wrap things up then, do you have any social media you like to promote, website, Twitter, whatever?
So Genfanad is on the web at genfanad.com. If you Google Genfanad, even if you typo it, you'll probably find us. Genfanad stands for Generic Fantasy Adventure, which not everyone realizes. It's just the first 3 letters of each word. And we're on Twitter at Genfanad. We're on Instagram. We're on Facebook. We're on Steam. Please wishlist us if you are interested in the game on Steam. And most importantly, the entire team is on Discord. We have a few thousand people in our Discord that are all looking forward to playing the game. And please go there and chat and make it active. And we will be giving out some beta codes near the end of the beta period if you're interested in trying it out.
All right, sounds good. So with that, we're gonna wrap things up. Sorry about the sound issue with for the people watching this. I'll try and get things at least somewhat corrected on my end or in editing, but I'm not sure how much I'll be able to catch. But Andrei, thank you so much for coming on. Best of luck with Genfanad, and when it comes time for the actual release, I'll be happy to have you back on. We can talk about any new lessons learned, especially about how people are responding to the game once it gets out into like the greater ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. You will definitely have a lot of things that exploded during launch stories afterwards.
Which is another popular MMO mainstay who's been at day 1 of an MMO launch.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, with that said, we're going to wrap things up for our show. Thank you to everybody watching. Be sure to do the liking, subscribing, and commenting. In the recorded version, you will find links to everything that Andrei mentioned. And there'll be links, of course, to Patreon, Discord, and stuff from me as well. Again, if you are a developer working on an upcoming game and would like to come on and talk about it, I am always looking for new guests. So with that said, come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, whereas in the art and science of games. And until next time, take care.